And we Americans have thought that we had little need to know our history, and even less geography. Recently, there was a study, right after World War II, there was a study of a map of Europe, and college graduates were given a map of Europe with numbers in each country, and the names over here with numbers and with letters, and they were to match them. Over a third of the college graduates put France where Germany is and Germany where France is. And if you go to the Middle East and draw a map of the Middle East, and you take all the names out and the colors out, and just put numbers in, and then put over here A, B, C, D, E, F, and have them match, how many of you could name the countries of the Middle East in that way? How many of you knew where Iraq was and where Palestine and Jordan and so forth? Very few. But that is something that we all need to do much more of. Western historians and many others think about the past as strictly structured into eras of the past. I have in my head a picture of a line, and the line goes something like this, way down through history. And I know different ages and periods where I have dates that I can fix. 520 BC, Pericles. 520 AD is Justinian. 330 BC, Alexander the Great. 330 AD, Constantine. These are relative, but by that I can see in my mind a picture of the history of the past. But in Arabic, the verbs do not carry past, present, and future. Verbs carry completed or not completed. Kataba, it was written, not it was completed writing. Not it happened in the past. Of course, it was completed, it's already happened. But the past is not emphasized, and the future is not emphasized. You could put prefixes on and tell the future and so forth, but that's not emphasized. So that you've got all this history, but it's not lined up on that long line in my head. It's right here. So that for most Arabs, history is all a part of their present experience. And that's very important for us to understand. The people in the Middle East live at the crossroads of history. You have no idea how many different peoples have been through this. This is the Fertile Crescent. And these are, you can see where the colors are, where people live. And in this Fertile Crescent, the Greeks came and fought the Persians, the Medes and the Hyksos and the Hittites and the Egyptians, all have fought in this area. The place which we called Megiddo, or Armageddon, has had battles going on for thousands of years because it's a narrow pass between the Disraeli Plain and the Plain of Sharon. And if you're going from north to south in Palestine, it's the only way to get an army through. If you come around Mount Carmel, what's now Haifa, it's pretty narrow and it could be defended by a few people. But if you have an army, you've got to get them through that valley. And for years and years and years, people have come there and fought there. So the Arabs have this history of battles and so forth. But they are now thinking entirely as if the past was in the same time today. So a language affects the way. Now, another Semitic language in the Middle East, Hebrew, had the same thing. But in 1900 to 1912, Ben Yehuda reformed Hebrew because Hebrew hadn't been a spoken language except during prayers since the Jews were carried into Babylonian captivity in the 6th century BC. So they rewrote Hebrew, and then the first thing they did was put tense into the Hebrew verb, so that Jews now in Israel, or people who speak Hebrew, can think about the past in the same way that Westerners do. But Arabs do not think that way, and Ethiopians do not think that way, because they speak Amharic, which is another Semitic language. So language affects a great deal how you think about history and how you think about time. So now we've had three things. The question of whether you're an individual or have a group identity. And this is not loyalty to the family. This is much stronger. This is an integral part of you, this group identity. It's not a loyalty. You can't lay it down and take up another loyalty. You can't just move from one to the other. It is part of your identity. And incidentally, if you move from one religious community to another in the Middle East, you lose all inheritance, you lose your marriage vows, you lose everything that you had in that community, and you go into the other community as a complete newborn with nothing. So there's not much moving from one community to another. So the second thing that you need to know is that the whole concept of nationality is very different for people in the Middle East. Nationality for them is outside their sense of individual, group, millet, and it's something that's completely different from our very strong sense of nationality. It's my belief that 100 years from now, people will look back at our last century and say, what were all those people fighting and dying about over national states? We will have become one world, maybe. That's one thing to hope for. Then the third thing is that the whole concept of history, the whole concept of time is very different. Arabs may not, people of the Middle East, not just Arabs, but Persians and Turks as well, may make an appointment to see you on a certain day or on a certain hour and meander in the next day or the next hour or whenever it happens to move them to be there. The Arabs have an expression, it's bukra, means tomorrow. In Spanish have the mañana, which means tomorrow. Now that can mean, yes, tomorrow, and within 24 hours I'm going to do this. But what you always say to them, is this bukra sahir? Well, is it bukra bil mishmish? Is this a real tomorrow, or is it tomorrow in apricot time? Because tomorrow in apricot time comes and goes so fast, it never comes. It's about the second week in June. It's here and it's gone. So bukra bil mishmish means never. And then, but they will always answer you. They will all answer, inshallah, God willing. In other words, it's not in my hands. And I forgot to mention that. The Arabs and then the whole people in the Middle East have a very strong sense that God has written everything for you long in advance. It is fate. And the whole of life is fate. So when you go out tonight, you'll find a lot of these things on this 4 pages that you're going to pick up. Now I would like to have questions, if you have, and I will answer what I can. Questions? Jack, surely you've got one. Yes, dear. Yes, yes, sir. Excuse me again, louder.
Do you see a lot of the differences that you're identifying? Are they going away as you have more of a global economy and the growing strength, arguably the United Nations and the spread of religion in this country, et cetera?
Things are changing very fast in the Middle East for something that we haven't talked about, and that is the OPEC bonanza, the largest transfer of riches in the history of the world and in the least time. But between 1972 and today, over 1/3 of the world's capital has gone into the hands of 13 OPEC countries, 11 of which are Muslim and 9 of which are Arab. So, and this has changed things drastically. Another thing I didn't talk, when we're talking about the Middle East, if you're talking about the general population, you're talking about one thing. If you're talking about the Western educated leaders who speak English and think in English and French, it's quite another thing. During the first 20 years of the OPEC bonanza, the Kuwaitis and the Saudis, Kuwaitis here and the Saudis here, threw away a lot of money. But the Arabs still have 25% of the world's capital. The Saudis alone own 7% of the New York Stock Exchange. If all oil in the Middle East stopped today, the Middle East people would be a force in the world for the next 100 years because of the money they've got. And I've got news for you. the people in the Gulf, in the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Oman and Muscat, all of these people are hanging on to their money and making much more. Dubai is the economic center of the world between London and Singapore. And they only have 90,000 barrels of oil a day. That's practically nothing. They're using their money very wisely. When I was dean of students at the American University of Beirut in the early 1960s, we had not a single student from the Gulf or Saudi Arabia. None of their high schools were good enough to send them. When I went in April to visit a friend of mine in United Arab Emirates, he took me to meet the Minister of Higher Education. Magdalen College, Oxford. This man is Magdalen College, Oxford. His father was an illiterate. And he is very knowledgeable and very wise man. These people are not hicks, and they are not fools. Now, those of us in Lebanon, Palestine, and I count myself as a Levantine because I've lived in Palestine and Lebanon most of my life in the Middle East, we all sort of look down on those people in the Gulf. They were kind of those hicks, like everybody looks down on us in East Tennessee. We're hicks, but we're pretty smart hicks. Anyway, they are not hicks anymore, and they are very smart, and they're not wasting their money like the Saudis or the Kuwaitis. They're hanging on to it. And they're building a fabulous city. It's the most modern city in the whole world, Dubai. Very expensive, so you save your pennies if you're going there, because it costs a lot. $200 just to go into one of the hotels to look at the lobby. And it's over $1,500 a night if you want to stay. So it's a fabulous place. Yes, Layla?
Are they behaving as individuals or within a community group?
Excuse me?
Are they behaving as individuals or within a community group?
I wasn't there long enough to be sure, but it looked to me like the sheikhs are pretty much in command, and they've got the money. So the people who have the power also have the money, and they're being very careful that it not go anywhere else, that it multiply right where it is. And they control almost all of the ports in the world. Remember the big brouhaha when they started to buy the port of New York and the port of New Orleans? And they use Chinese laborers, and they're very efficient. They're making money all over the world. They're deeply invested in China and Singapore, all around the world. And they are not rubes. They are very clever. But the money is, the people who are doing the work out there aren't getting much of it. They're only 12% of the population in UAE are natives. 65% are from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Ceylon. 8% are from British Isles or from New Zealand or Australia or South Africa. And only about 10% are Arabs from other places. But they're doing it all in English. There's no problem if you go there, you don't have to speak a word of anything but English. Everyone speaks English. But it's an extremely, you won't get much of the money. They're hanging on to it. Remember Gatlinburg, when Gatlinburg started? And no one could even rent a place down there if their name wasn't Ogle or Maples. And so these people are hanging on to their money. Yes, Leila.
I just wanted to respond to Brian when he asked the question. I think there is a problem still in the Middle East as far as the identity is concerned. We do not have a consensus on what nationalism is or what constitutes a nation, first and foremost. So our identities are really diverse, actually, all over the place. Even in the most educated, which is Lebanon and Palestine, even there is no consensus of what makes a nation. And that's why the fights, that we have discrepancies and then people get on each other's nerves. That is not, even with the high education, and we have very high education. In fact, in Lebanon, we have the highest number of nuclear physicists per square mile. But we cannot count on a definition of what constitutes a nation because it's still very tribal, very extreme. Anything is scratched, we go back to that.
Okay. Questions? Yes, dear.
There's some of this, show, I mean, I know that the Arabic culture has been influenced a lot by Islam, but are some of these, are you able to transfer to other Islamic cultures that are outside the Middle East, like in Indonesia
Some, yeah, she is asking if because the major force in the Middle East is Islam, are these same factors true in other Muslim countries? Islam has adapted better to contrasting cultures than any other religion. Christian missionaries put muumuus on the people in Hawaii and made the Africans get rid of all but one wife and all that sort of thing. We insist that being Christian means being Western. But Islam is adapted. And Islam is very wise in one thing. They don't care if the first generation is not really very Muslim. They know the next generation will be real Muslims. But my short experience in Indonesia, they're nowhere near as concerned about some things. And I've been to Central Asia, where for 75 years the Russians didn't allow them to pray at all. And I was there when they had their first public prayers in the Rajasthan Square in Samarkand, the first day after Ramadan. And I found that they're more theoretical about Islam. But it's very different in every country, I think, in every area, every culture, not so much country as culture. Other questions? Yes, sir.
What is your take on the kind of contradictory position of the United States of total support for Israel, but yet reliance and support for the oil producing countries?
I was trying to avoid any question of Israel as much as I could. Just suffice it to say that I've spent my life working with the Arabs, and I think that America makes a big mistake. But we couldn't have gotten away with getting all the Arab oil in our pocket at the same time we were helping Israel if the Saudis and the Kuwaitis hadn't cared more for money than they cared for the Palestinians. So it's not just America's fault. A lot of it's the fault of the Saudis and the Kuwaitis. They were much more interested in their money than they were in the Palestinians. They've only discovered the Palestinians recently. I was working in Saudi Arabia one time, and the man in the land office said, "Stop speaking that Palestinian stuff. If you can't speak Saudi, don't speak at all." So there's an awful lot of snobism in Saudi Arabia about that. But that's too big a subject. That takes about 6 years to talk about. Yes, in the far back.
Yes, sir. You were speaking about the future of America possibly 100 years from now, and what you foresaw as being pretty much a nation where nationalism is no longer important. Do you see it as being sort of a middle-aged system throughout the country, or do you see our country as possibly, I know it's very unlikely at this day and age to consider, but maybe even working with other countries throughout the world in the way that we do this day?
Well, I think economically, first of all, television has changed the Middle East more in 40 years than all of the missionaries and all the education, all of the Western influences put together. And everyone in the Middle East has a dish, even in refugee camps. They're watching television. I won't tell you what they watch, but it's not exactly what I would have them watch. They watch Jerry Springer, for instance. And they think life in America is Jerry Springer and Baywatch. And they think we're pretty sinful people. But getting back, I think that the tremendous globalization of economy is going to change the world so fast that, and I'm 83, but I plan to be around another 20 years at least. And I expect to see in my lifetime a very different world and a very different Middle East. And the Middle East has changed more in the 58 years since I first went out there than it's possible to tell you. You have no idea how comfortably the middle-class people live in Amman. Homes that you would die for, the most beautiful homes you've ever imagined. And there are thousands of them in Amman and in Ramallah and all over the Middle East. These people know how to live, believe me. I don't think anyone enjoys life as much as the Lebanese. I don't know where they get the money from, but they sure have a wonderful time. They can go out to dinner and laugh and have fun and enjoy themselves more than anybody else in the world. So I think the world is getting to be one, and that's one of the reasons why we have to learn to like each other and appreciate each other and stop emphasizing the differences between us. Well, I hope the one thing I'm most interested in is that we stop talking about China as a future enemy. China is too big and too powerful and too important. We must make Chinese our friends, and all of you young people ought to be learning Chinese. Whoa, Lao Shu, Beijing Chifan Da Shui. You need to start studying your Chinese. Yes, Joel.
You bring up the idea of television changing, and television's a one-way street. You don't talk back to your television expecting it to hear you.
Oh, yes, you do. But it doesn't hear you, but you do. I curse mine often. Happily, it doesn't curse me back.
I'm wondering whether there's even more change to be expected through the internet.
Oh, definitely. And the Middle East is deficient in the numbers of internets. Many people are majoring in computers, but there aren't that many computers yet. But one thing I might tell you about, they started Sesame Street in Qatar, Iftah Simsim, and it's in classical Arabic. And lots of little kids now are speaking the written language which their parents and grandparents can't speak. They understand it when they hear it and when they read it, but they cannot produce it themselves. And another thing too, the schools in the Middle East, there's a law in every country. We're talking about education next time. There's a law in every country that you must teach in the written language. No one can do it. They're doing it now in the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the Hezbollah, up to the 10th grade, children speak only Fusha, the written language, in the classroom. And it's going to transform the Middle East. They're going to be the leaders of the Middle East because of their language. So too many Arabs think in French or English and not their own language. Yes, dear.
The war on education is on the 24th of March, Tuesday.
It's 7 o'clock
Yes.
here. 7 o'clock on Tuesday, I will be talking about how modernizing education could change westernizing schooling in the Middle East. Notice the difference between education and schooling.
If the President asked you for advice regarding our policy and our practice, our adventures in the Middle East, what would you advise?
Ooh, that's a big one. All right, give me your email address and I'll tell you what advice I sent to Hillary Clinton on the 17th of January. Andrew Young, who was our ambassador to the UN and mayor of Atlanta, was my roommate in seminary, and we've been friends for 58 years. And so Andy was seeing Hillary on the 17th and said, Graham, what should I tell her? And I sent him 3 one-page papers about, for heaven's sake, stop talking about peace in Palestine. No one's going to sign anything permanent. It's time to negotiate a real truce with no violence for 20, 40, 60 years. Then after all of us old fogies that have got a lot of hate in our hearts die, maybe it's a chance that we can make peace. But for now, there's no possibility of anyone signing anything permanent in Palestine. So stop. We've given 7 Nobel Prizes for settling the Palestine question, and it looks worse to me than it did when I went in 1950. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing, for heaven's sake, send a really good ambassador like Darijian, who runs the James Baker Center in Rice University. Send him back to Syria. We need to win Syria over. If we win Syria, nothing from Iran can reach Hezbollah and, or Hamas. And we need to send an ambassador to Iran. Here's Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan has 2%, the second largest natural gas, and the 4th largest oil reserves in the world. We can't get to it. The Russians wanted to build a pipeline through Afghanistan. Why? I don't know, because when they got down to the Pakistan border, they have to go through Baluchistan, and no one has ever captured the Baluchis. No one has ever ruled the Baluchis. They're wild. There's no way a pipeline could go through there without being 60 feet under the ground with helicopters on top of it all the time. But right here in western Iran is a pipeline. Look at it. We could build one ourselves right next to it. That's practically unoccupied. Stop being our prejudice about Iran and talk to Iran. It's to our benefit to talk to Iran. We could do more by talking to these people. Diplomacy means talking and listening. It doesn't mean honoring them. You don't have to like them. We didn't like the Russians, and we had an embassy in Moscow for 50 years. We need to talk. Yes?
So to go along with that, would you say that all governments, including the Middle Eastern governments, should advance secularization along the government lines and leaving the religion at home?
It's not for us to say, because religion, most of their governments are secular, and most of the governments in the Middle East are dictatorships modeled on the West. They never had any such dictatorships before the 20th century. They learned that from us. Almost all of the governments in the Middle East are dictatorships. Some are benevolent, some, yeah, okay, but, yeah, well, they just voted in Sharia law. Don't be so afraid of Sharia law. Just don't go there and steal anything if you don't want to lose a hand. And certainly don't...
Iran is a secular nation, but they tended towards more religious.
Oh, well, they're completely...
In response to our religious vote.
They're completely controlling the religious, by the religious. It's not Ahmadinejad. He's a loudmouth. He's not in control in Iran. We need to talk to the religious leaders that are in control. And they're willing to talk. The previous president, Khatami, was an extremely sincere and fine person we should have been talking to. But oh no, he didn't do what we wanted him to do. We need to listen a little bit. We need to learn. But most of all, we need a new National Defense Education Act. We had, when we had the Sputnik went over on a honeymoon, we saw it twice a night as we came through the Mediterranean. And they got together with Jerome Bruner and some of the other great educators and wrote a wonderful bill. I got 1 year of my study of Arabic at Harvard on the National Defense Education. We need thousands of people that know Arabic, Urdu, Chinese, all the languages of the world, and the cultures of the world. We need to understand people of the world. They're all understanding us, believe me. They all know English, and they're all studying American studies and studying us. We need to learn them too, learn all about them. And it's very, very rich life, getting to know other cultures. As I need to finish pretty soon, I think. As I was getting on the plane to come back, last fall, as I think I told some of you, I spent 10 weeks in the Middle East. I lived in 12 different houses, 12 different families, 7 different religions. In each of the families, I was Uncle Graham. And as I got on the plane to fly back, I thought, what an extremely lucky person I am, that I can be in different cultures and be accepted as a member of the family. I'm uncle. I'm in a family, even in a Muslim family, the women don't veil or even cover their hair. I'm part of the family. And that, of course, that takes 58 years. And you would be surprised how many hundreds of thousands of mistakes I've made, and blunders and boo-boos, and had to be corrected and so forth. But it's worth it. And all of you need to learn other languages and other cultures. Even, I'm an East Tennessee hillbilly, born and bred. This property is on this building is on my great-grandfather's farm, where until 1911, he hadn't owned it since then. Yes? I'm going in March to talk to the Minister of Education of Palestine, who was a colleague of mine in the UNRWA for years, to try to get them to take up. I'm trying to revive discussion-based education in the Arab world. We'll talk about that on the 24th. And I'm talking to the Minister of Education there. And I have a project in Jordan from the 6th to the 10th grade. All children are going to have to do this. And we're working on the teacher education. Yes, dear. Ahlan wa sahlan. Yeah. Louder, please, other people.
Have you ever taken students or considered taking students as like a cultural experience?
I can't take you. My grandson is 22, my only grandchild, and I took him around and showed him, took him to homes and so forth. I can't do that with strangers. I can't take you into the home and take you into the hotels and so forth. It's kind of ersatz. I haven't done it, but when our National Guard got ready to go, is anyone here from the National Guard? Anyone here from the ROTC? Shame on them. They're all going to the Middle East. The National Guard is going to Iraq next November and have asked me to go back with them, and they don't bother to come. Well, they want me to come and speak to their groups, but at any rate, it's something that I've done for the National Guard, the Tennessee National Guard. And I'd be glad to do it for students from here. This is what I'm doing now. Then you can go on your own. You take a group of students. If you have relatives there, take them to visit. Inti min Ramallah wala min fain? Min fain? Where are you from? Ah, ahlan wa sahlan. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Say a bit more about our efforts to plant democracy in the Middle East. You made
Why are we so determined to use the word democracy? Many of these people have had perfectly good governments through history. They've had some bad ones too. But what we need to talk about is the rule of law, justice under the law, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of travel, and all of those things which are very important. Who cares who votes what? And it won't work. You cannot have a democracy if everybody votes according to their middle day every time. We're taking a census. Each time we have an election in Iraq, we're taking a census. That's not a democracy. Dogmatic groups, and the Middle East leaders are dogmatic, they will not compromise. Individuals can compromise. Individuals can move from one party to another. But groups cannot. And this is the trouble. Every 10 or 15 years, we have to have a war in Lebanon so that it could be a little more even as a result. And it's going to do the same thing in Iraq. We've Lebanese-ized Iraq. But we don't need to. We need to get out there and talk to them and give them the opportunity and the education and so forth. We controlled the education of Iraq for 2 whole years. Do you know what we did? We got rid of the best teachers in the country, people who belonged to the Ba'ath Party. The Ba'ath Party used to be the most idealistic people in the whole country. And we threw all of them out without checking to see who was good and who was bad. And then we got rid of all the pictures of Saddam in the name of Saddam, and they went right back to memorizing a lot of junk. And it doesn't matter whether, like in Pakistan, when Musharraf was here and talked to W in about 2002, W said to him very cleverly, if you will get rid of all the madrasas, religious schools, madrasas, in Pakistan, we, the American government, will pay you to put them in government schools. Well, if they're going to memorize, just memorize what's written in books. It doesn't matter what school they're in. It's better for them to memorize the Quran than to memorize a bunch of leftover Western books. So the method of education is what makes the difference. If they learn to think for themselves and to discuss and to do research, then that's what's going to break them out and help them to have a government that they want and need. You know, what you're depending on in the Gulf now is for paternalism. Hopefully these people, these sheikhs, are going to be kind and generous and do the right thing and so forth, but it's not under anybody's control but theirs. But we have dictatorship in Egypt, which we've been supporting. We have dictatorships in other places that we're supporting. We need to be working on education and setting examples. And when there is a good democratic vote, as there was in Palestine in 2006, we should accept it. It's not what we wanted. I don't like Hamas at all. But Hamas had to take the responsibility of ruling both the West Bank and Gaza. They would have learned that they can't be as dogmatic as they've been talking, and they would have grown up a little bit. Instead, they got their little bit of Gaza. They got rid of Fatah with violence and cruelty, and now they're failing badly as governors of Gaza. And it's our fault. But Sharon told W, don't recognize it. We didn't recognize it. We talked democracy, and there's one very good election. Now, I don't like the results, but the results didn't vote for Hamas. They voted against Fatah because Fatah was corrupt. And they got rid of Fatah. Fatah is a little bit more sober now. But we need to put our money where our mouth is. If we talk about democracy, then if somebody votes and something, don't say, no, because you don't do the way we want, we're not going to accept your election. I don't like Hamas, and most of my friends are in deep trouble in Gaza as a result of Hamas. How many of you knew Fifi Saba, was a student here? Fifi's uncle and his wife and two small children, early teenage boys, went out of their house because it was near a mosque. And when they're Christians, they're Greek Orthodox. And when they came back the next day to look at the building, an Apache American helicopter came over and killed one of the two boys, Fifi's first cousins. And this, what have they got to do with Hamas? And this is going on throughout the whole Middle East one way or the other, not just in Palestine and Gaza. What we need is to concentrate on the positive and stop getting ourselves involved with all the arms and all the... Where are all these arms the Afghanis have got? Where are they coming from? Remember that America trained 40,000 mujahideen in Afghanistan, including Ali North claims that he trained Osama bin Laden. And now we gave $13 billion worth of arms to Iraq, to Saddam, because he was fighting Iran. What kind of policies America got? We have no principles in our policies anymore. So that's the first thing I would say to the president. Have your foreign policy follow principles. We're interested in civil rights and human rights, and your human rights and your civil rights and your education and your strengths. Because the stronger other people are in the world, the safer it is for us. Any other questions? Thank you very much. I'll see you on education on the 24th.